الله. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا ومن يهدي الله فلا يضل له ومن يضل له فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds. We seek His help and we ask for His forgiveness. We seek refuge from God, from the evil of our souls and from the evil of what we've put out into this world. Whomsoever God guides will never be led astray, and whomsoever God leads astray, no one can guide. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, that there is no deity, there is nothing that's worthy of worship but Allah, having no partner, and I bear witness that that man named Muhammad ibn Abdullah from Bani Hashim of the Quraysh was his slave and last messenger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, مَا خَلَقْتُ وَالْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونِ. I have not created the jinn and the mankind except that they worship me. And He's also said, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ عُبُدُوا رَبُّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. O people, adore your guardian Lord, the one who created you and those before you, perhaps that you may be righteous. My dear Muslims, not too long ago, a good friend of mine, he came up to me and it's a close friend of mine that I have deep discussions with, and he said to me, Hamza, I want to tell you something. I think that I've seen a problem within the Muslim community, within the Ummah. And I asked him to go on, and he said something that shocked me, and I gave it a lot of thought about it, and this is what I'm going to speak about today. And he said, Islam has become its own worst enemy. If we understand that the worst sin in Islam is idolatry, is worshipping other than Allah, then he said, Islam has become its own idol. When he said this, I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, this is antithetical to the message that Islam brings. It's in the Quran, and it's in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But then he asked me to listen to him and to hear him explain what he was saying, and it started to make sense. So I want to entertain today just the possibility that that's exactly what's happened with our ummah and with our understanding of our deen, that we've idolized Islam and we've actually lost the point of what Islam is trying us to do for us and what we're supposed to do to the world through Islam. I don't want to impassion people. I don't want to raise polemics. I want to stay away from politics. But I want to understand. I want to understand, and I'm sure other people see it as well, that we continuously look around us in the masajid, here among the Muslim community, in the Muslim community abroad, and we see things that don't feel right. Now, to be able to address the subject, I want to ask the questions: what does it mean to fall into idolatry, into shirk? What does it mean to worship Allah alone? And what does it mean to worship an ideology? If we go to the dictionary and we look up definitions of idolatry, there's several explanations for the word, but there's one in particular that stands out, and it says something visible but without substance. Think about that, something visible without substance. That could be the person who's in the masajid for the majority part of the day, killing themselves with prayer, fasting, but in the inner soul, in the heart, there's absolutely nothing there. And what ends up being is that they end up falling farther away from Allah, farther away from the truth of Islam, from the path that was set by Rasulullah Muhammad ﷺ. And that's what is meant by something visible without substance. We can see the prayers, we can see the acts of devotion, but that substance, that metal that's supposed to be there as Muslims, it's gone. What it means when our Islam is visible, but it has no inner substance, let's not forget, first of all, I want to make clear, my dear Muslims, that the ultimate purpose of Islam, the ultimate purpose of deen in general, whether it's Islam or something else, is salvation. That is the central point, that is the focal point of Islam. And the axial point of salvation, we know, everybody in this room knows, is Islam. All possibilities of salvation, Islam rests in the center, and all possibilities of salvation radiate outward from that center of Islam. Are there possibilities of salvation for the pygmy in Central Africa who's never heard of the Prophet, who's never heard of Christianity? Allahu A'lam. This is God's abode. This is what God knows. But there is a possibility of salvation for him. But the central, the white hot center is Islam. And here I'm referring to Islam in the perfect tense Arabic word, istaslama. The surrender, the capitulation of your very self to Allah. And I'm not referring to this mold of motions and rituals that we go through, sometimes without intentions and sometimes without khushu', the Eid prayer, the fasting and whatnot. My main point, dear Jum'ah, today, is that today many people are plagued by a fixation on the practice instead of the point of the practice. And what's the point of the practice? The point of the practice is Allah. Khutba is to remind people about Allah. We do everything for Allah. It's not Islam. It's not, Islam is our tariqah. Islam is our way to Allah, but the whole point is Islam. And this is what I think I need as a reminder for myself, and I think this is what Muslims need as reminders for themselves and for our communities in today's world. When Islam becomes an end for something else, be it an ideology or ego building, politics, or the justification for personal desires, and I think we can all have personal examples of how we've dealt with people, of how we've met people that use Islam to some other gain or some other end except getting closer to Allah. When it becomes an end for something else, it ceases to be a path for God, and it becomes an idol. So when you do Islam for something else, even if it's just because I'm from Algeria and that's what my parents do, or I'm from Malaysia and that's what we grew up doing, then that's when Islam becomes an idol. And I'm going to get into this further. We must keep our eyes up on God as we walk along the path of Islam. Always keep your eyes up. Once we focus our eyes only on the human formulaic religion of Islam, quote unquote, Allah can become another religious vocabulary word and not the source and the end of all things. One example you can see of this is, my wife's from Egypt, and I've been lucky to visit that beautiful country many times. There's a political group there. I won't say the name, but I will say one of their mottos. Al-Islam huwa al-hal. Islam is the solution. What you ask me, I think Allah is the solution. Islam is just a way to get there. And when Islam becomes a hal for a political motivation, then you really have to wonder how much of a hal it is in that context. Let me give you some other examples. And these are the things that I see and that I've observed in my own self when I go to the masajid or when I pray at home. The prayer, the sajda, the sujood that we do that's the point of our life. That's the ultimate point of our life. Allah says in the Quran, كَلَا لَا تُطِيعُوا وَاسْجُدْ وَقَتَارِبْ. Do not obey, but prostrate and draw near. وَقَتَارِبْ. That's all you have to do. You do your sajda and you draw near to Allah. But today, and I've had this experience several times, I go into a masjid and I've already prayed my prayers and I'm waiting for the next salah to come, or I'm waiting for somebody. And somebody comes in and prays. Just as a little exercise, I don't know, astaghfirullah, if I shouldn't be doing this, but you recite the prayer as the person is praying. And you say the takbirat al-ihram when their hands go up, and you're basically saying Maliki Yawm Medina, they're already going into ruku'. Now, let's not forget the hadith, when the man prayed at the masjid in Medina, in the presence of Rasulullah ﷺ, and when he came to sit with the Prophet said, "Go back, for you have not prayed." Now imagine that you have not prayed. What if we've done an entire life of prayers that we have not prayed? My point is, in this part, we need to be a little bit more observant and we need to be a little bit more conscious of our prayers. The Arabs say, naqar ad-dik, the pecking of the rooster on the ground. You just don't want to pray like this. And that's what we see a lot. We have to understand that the point of our life is not the fancy degree at Georgetown, or it's not to become a medical student, or it's not to whatever. The point of our life, in reality, is sajda, and all that represents as Muslims. Also, we know from the hadith that Allah said, to be close to Allah, you have to go into sujood. The closest that a servant is to his Lord is when he's in prostration. It's narrated by Muslim. And we also have the scholar whose name I forget, who said, fakhri, my poverty as in my poverty in putting my face down on the floor, that is my fakhr, that is my dignity, that is my righteousness. So it really behooves us to, when we enter the prayer, realize that this is a communion with God. This is what we do. This is what we get up for to do every day. The perfection of prayer, of khushu', it embodies so many things that we can take on to make this experience so much more meaningful. The smelling good, putting on good orders, designing or placing a special place in our house, a special mihrab if you want, just to pray. Remember that prayers, the salah is when prayers are answered. The salah is a dhikr Allah. This is when we recite the Quran. And there's barakah in these things. And there's also barakah in the place where these things take place. So if you devote one part of your house to a special part where you do this, this is a place where you can get in the zone, where you can really connect with Allah, which is the point of the prayer. And also dressing the part. You know, don't get up and wear your pajamas and when you're praying the Fajr or if you're praying at night. Put on some clothes. You know, people dress up with their absolute best clothes to go to a job interview, or to meet somebody important, or to, God forbid, go on a date. But when it's time to meet Allah, we all look like slobs. You know, I remember speaking to one. I overheard a sister speak, and she was talking about the wife of Sheikh Abdullah Adami. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a well-known sheikh here in the States. And his wife had said that soon after they got married, she realized the value and the importance of the man, because in the mornings, right before Fajr, he would wake up, and even if they hadn't had relations, he would take a shower, and he would put on his best clothes, and he would put on his best perfume, and he would go downstairs to the living room and pray the Salah, and he would act, and he would adorn himself as if he was about to stand in the prayer of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other thing that is important to remember about the prayer is that I think that as Muslims we fooled ourselves into thinking that it has no value for us. And one of the greatest signs for me in my own personal life, I've seen how, especially with all the tumult that's happened in a lot of our Muslim countries in the last year, people have really forgotten the power of prayer and what it can do, and the power of dua, and the power of prayer and dua in the latter part of the night. I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. I had a friend who was here in the East Coast, and when he's Syrian, when the problems in Syria started, he began to organize rallies all up and down the eastern seaboard against the regime in Syria. And I told him, you know, we really don't have, and I'm not a faqih, I'm not from Dar al-Iftah, so I can't make a fatwa, but from what I understand, we don't have a history, we don't have a culture of mass protesting on the street until we go a horse. That's not part of our tradition. If we look at the seerah of Rasulullah ﷺ, we know that when he went to Ta'if, and he was ran out of that town by little kids throwing rocks at him, he didn't go back to Mecca and whine and protested. You know, the Arabs say the protests are the weapons of the weak. What he did is he went to an orchard and he put his hands up and he made dua to Allah. That was his protest. So if we had real sincerity in our hearts, and we had a real understanding, which we don't anymore, it's lost, of what this prayer is, as soon as we started killing people in Hama or in Damascus, the mosques would have been full at 4 a.m. in the morning, begging Allah to make this happen. I had a friend who was also an Egyptian who was living in Kuwait when the Iraqis invaded, and he said that as soon as it looked bleak, as soon as people were disappearing, women were getting raped on the streets, that people organized, the Al-Sabah, they were gone. They went to Saudi Arabia. People organized around the mosques. If you needed water, if you needed food, you went to the masajid. And they said that at night, from 3 in the morning until Fajr, you could hear all the mosques in the city, Shia and Sunnah, begging Allah to help, begging Allah to take the musibah of the Iraqis away. Saddam wasn't even the Iraqis. So, we need to understand the power of this prayer, the power of tahajjud, and we need to take it back for our own sake. I'm going to give you two last examples about prayer and about generally understanding what the message of Islam is and about the connection with Allah. Two examples, and then I'll close with the second khutbah. I was lucky enough to go to Hajj 2 years ago. I went to Saudi Arabia. And when I finished with the majority of rituals, I went back to the haram to do a tawaf al-wala. And I prayed, my tawaf was interrupted by the adhan for dhuhr. And I ended up praying on the roof of the masjid around 1 in the afternoon. And as soon as the imam said the taslim, the man next to me, who I could tell by the way that he was dressed, he was Saudi. And I could tell that also from his accent, he was from the central part of the country, he was from Najd. and he immediately puts his hand out and he says, Taqabbalallah. Now that's not a Saudi thing to do. That's not a custom of theirs. That's not a sunnah of the Saudis. And it's also strange because most people from this country, they have their tribal connections, they have their large families, and they don't really feel compelled to, I mean, they do a wonderful job as hosts, but on the individual level, a lot of them just choose not to interact with the Hajjaj. This man, who didn't speak any English, just puts his hand down and he starts asking, and within my very limited Arabic, and and he didn't speak English, we talked about Al-Hajj and his experience, and he told me that he was from Riyadh, he was born and raised there, and that he, because he wasn't allowed to do as a Saudi national, he wasn't allowed to do Hajj except for every 4 years, he said that he really felt his home was Mecca. And we started talking, we ended up talking for about 2 hours. And the thing that I understood about this man, who looked like any other Saudi that you might see on the street, was this man had really gone aside at one point in his life, and he said, why am I a Muslim? Why do I believe in all this? Why do I love Mecca? Is it because I'm from Najd? Is it because I'm from Riyadh? Is it because my parents are Saudi and they converted to Islam 1,400 years ago? Or is it because I really, really believe in this? Is that the real reason that I'm Muslim? And I think that's one of the things that we have to ask ourselves. And the final thing is that I want to say is I wasn't born a Muslim. I'm from Mexico. I converted to Islam 11 years ago, and I want to tell you, brothers and sisters, that we live in a society where people have absolutely no concept of Allah. And I actually used to be there. I used to be on that other side. And I remember that when I converted to Islam, literally, the next day, there was this God consciousness that I was completely aware of what my role in this world was and what my role was for my Creator. We're dealing day in and day out with people who have no idea about that. If they fail an exam, it's the end of the world. If something happens, if we have to deal with the worst musibah, whether it's bearing a child, or whether it's divorce, or whether it's the loss of money, or whether it's the loss of a job, we have a religion, we have a sunnah from a beautiful messenger, ﷺ. They teach us how to deal with all of these things. The people, our neighbors, our wonderful neighbors in this country, go through life, the majority of them, Allahu A'lam what's in their hearts, without even understanding that they have a magnificent, ineffable Lord that they can rely on. And being on that side, and now being on this side, I can tell you that there's absolutely nothing sweeter. There's nothing sweeter than that taste. And I want Muslims, especially the Muslims who are from the Muslim countries, I want them to, because often you get this, and I think a lot of converts get this, I want them to stop saying, you're better than me because you converted to Islam. And I want Muslims to be able to say, I don't even want them to think that. I want them to be able to truly taste Islam, halawat ad-din, just the sweetness of this religion for what it is, despite whether they converted or where they were born. As Muslims, أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. I want to share with all of you some keen advice that has been given to me by different teachers over my last 11 years that I've been a Muslim about drawing close to Allah, drawing close to your Lord. And obviously there's endless advice, endless ways, there's endless advice from the Sunnah and from the Quran. But some particular things stick out, I think, for our times. The wudu, brothers and sisters, the absolute wudu. Al-wudu silah al-mu'min. It's the weapon of the believer. Know that the salah, it starts with a wudu. Don't have a conversation, don't talk on the phone when you're doing wudu. And I've even been told, I was told once, that the secret to salat al-istikhara is in the wudu. The secret to salat al-istikhara is not in the dua, you have to make the dua, but it's actually how perfect you do the wudu. So perfect your wudu. Understand, learn and follow its sunnahs. Use a thin stream of water, and do that for the intention that you know that the vast majority of human beings on this planet, they have to defecate, they have to drink, they have to cook, and they have to clean with the same water. And here we can just turn on hot, we can turn on cold, we can turn on lukewarm. Use a thin stream of water, which is that's the sunnah. And and perfect your wudu, and understand that wudu is part of the prayer. You enter the prayer as soon as you say wudu. Don't do it in the bathroom. I know that's really hard in our professional settings, whether you're working or whether you're in your school. Try to do the wudu somewhere else. If, by the way, you want to see a real wudu, you can go online to YouTube, and there's a video by Sheikh Abdullah Khatiri, who's one of our sheikhs from Mauritania, and you can see this man wudu. This wudu takes 10 minutes. That's real wudu. And I also want to remind people that there's a saying about Abu Hanifa that says that towards the end of his life, he actually stopped going to the masajid to pray the congregational prayers because the firasa that Allah had given him allowed him to see the sins of the people dripping off from their limbs during wudu, and he didn't even want to see that, so he ended up staying home. And finally, it's really good advice too. It's better to remain in wudu during a waking state because human beings are under a constant barrage of arrows, both from your inner selves and from the veiled world of the shayateen. And this is a reality. It's not a make-believe. Wudu provides protection in the unseen realm and is part of the hidden reality. And that's absolute truth. The Quran, brothers and sisters, know that the Quran is there for you to draw near to Allah. That it is absolutely essential. It is its absolute essential purpose so that you can learn how to submit to the divine plan. Recite it. Don't just put it up on your walls. Even if you don't speak Arabic, just recite it. You'll get rewarded for all of it. Tawbah. Know that religion only has one door, and it is the door of Tawbah. And know that Tawbah has a beginning, but it doesn't have an end. Once you start down that path, it's Tawbah every day. Tawbah, and istighfar for everything you do. And know that Tawbah is an absolute most important adab. It's a single most important adab that you can have with Allah, and it's the most important adab for a person who wants to draw near to Allah. Firstly, continuing on Tawbah, endeavor to rectify your relationship with the people that you have harmed. The people who will gain no benefit from the seeking closest to Allah because they will not have freed themselves from the outstanding rights of the people that they have hurt. Understand the greatness of what you have done in this world. And I'm talking about the bad deeds. And understand about the greatness of what you've left undone. What you should have done but you never did. And know that we as human beings, we each have our own fracture points. And have the humility of self to deal with them and heal them within your own self. The state of need. Always remain in a state of need with Allah. When a person forgets his utter state of despair, and I'm not talking about ya'as, which is the despair that shaitan tries to revive in the human hearts. I'm talking about his utter state of need. You're in a complete state of need before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a person forgets his utter state of despair and his utter need before Allah, then he opens himself up for the doors of musibah and affliction. Be mindful, and remember that zuhud, abstaining from, and I don't want to say poverty, I don't say that we should all be fuqara, but I'm talking abstaining from the unnecessities of this life, from extravagance, is a path that is closer to the path of the prophets, and is a quicker path to Allah. Remember that the saying, a little bit of pleasure is a little bit of deception. We know that if this is all ghurur, if this life is all ghurur, then when you inch a little bit towards that feel-good that we all like to experience, or that pleasure, you're also inching in towards deception. And you can't have, it's zero sum, literally. Aisha said that the first sunnah to be discarded, literally when the Prophet died, when he died, the first sunnah to be forgotten was the sunnah of eating in moderation. That was the very first sunnah. Literally, the Prophet was in the ground, and the next day people were gorging themselves. And also, there's another saying that says that the rungs of the ladder of Islam will break through the course of time. So if Islam is like a ladder, the rungs will break. And the first rung to break will be good governance. And we can all attest that that's completely broken in our time. And the last rung to break will be the prayer, which is what I spoke about before. Practical disengagement from all that does not lead us to Allah. Disengagement from wealth and the love of things. And I'm talking about you can be wealthy, you can work for these things, but don't let it be the attachment of your heart. May Allah put wealth in all our hands, but never in our heart. And that's what I really hope for the Muslims. Don't ever make Islam a thing or an object. And certainly don't ever feel like you or someone else has ownership of it. And lastly, brothers and sisters, reflect on the names and the attributes of Allah. Our role in life is to embody these attributes, and the question is, you get to choose which attribute you want to be. Do you want to be an attribute? Do you want to be an emissary of Ar-Rahman, or do you want to be an emissary of Al-Muntaqim? somebody who's vengeful, you know. Dedicate true knowledge of Allah's names and attributes. Know the names and the practice of dhikr, and practice dhikr with them in order to see them more clearly in this world. The names are Allah's defining terms of Himself. He defines Himself through these names. They are His powers in the world and His knowledge of Himself. Think about that. There are His powers in this world and knowledge of Himself. That's an amazing thing to give to us, and we're nothing. To know Allah, we must really know, feel, and live with His names, not just reduce His names to pieces of art in our homes. I hope that's all that I have to offer you today. I ask everybody to forgive me if there's anything that I said that was shameful or was untrue. Everything that was correct about what I said comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and anything that was short or that was evil comes absolutely from myself. إن الله والملائكة يصلي على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلم تسليما اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اخرجنا من ذل المعاصي إلى عزة الطاعة يا رب العالمين انصر الإسلام والمسلمين في كل مكان وانصر ذكرك والإسلام في قلوبنا يا رب العالمين. Allah, forgive us for everything that we have done. Forgive us for everything that we have left undone. I ask you to accept us for who we are, and I ask you to give us the itqan and the himmah to be who you want us to be. I'll ask you to give us husn al-khatam, the best of ends, and to reunite us all in paradise next to the Prophet.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.